We're back. Season 7, Episode 3, On the Wings of Keeradaks. This is the episode in which they need to get the hell out of Dodge now that they've rescued Echo. Hopefully that'll work out. Quote at the beginning, survival is one step on the path to living. God, ain't that the truth. What I find funny is I've been very vocal about applying, somewhat forcibly, my own terminology to reality for years upon years upon years. But it's interesting because the terminology of, survival to living is something everybody uses, right? I've noticed this everywhere. In fact, I've noticed this so much. I've noticed this all the way back in the 90s. Several episodes of Star Trek very specifically state survival is insufficient. Living is the goal. And it's funny how much that's just become the commonly accepted terminology. So, Wat Tambor, who is the Techno-Union idiot, excuse me, villain for the episode, is like, we must be more evil. We'll get back to him in a minute. I like how after a lot of the character-heavy stuff at the end of the previous episode, this episode actually begins with the very action-heavy stuff. This is something I've noticed. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I know, lore shock. Bear with me. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? And so, as a direct consequence, as a direct consequence, one of the things that I wanted and craved, specifically because I was functionally starving for this particular type of content, is I wanted continuity. At the time, I didn't know it, but what I really meant was I wanted string continuity. Now, that's my terminology. We just talked about this, but it's exactly what we're looking at here. This episode leads immediately to this episode, leads immediately to this episode. All three of these are functionally one episode, right? The Lord of the Rings trilogy is functionally one movie. That's string continuity. Make sense? There's all kinds of different types of continuity. There's setting continuity, there's character continuity, there's thematic continuity, there's yo-yo continuity. Hate that one. But because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, which was still dealing with the baggage of the 50s and 60s in terms of fiction and television creation, and movie creation, and of course eventually game creation, continuity was such a rare resource. You didn't see it. I've discussed Trek at length. Some of you who have watched my Ruminations or are simply familiar with, I'll use TNG as an example, know that while specific writers or creators or showrunners, would be pushing for things to matter past the credits, they faced an overwhelming amount of opposition from everyone above them. All of the people who had grown up in the 60s and 70s, or who cut their teeth in the 70s and 80s, all said, no, continuity's bad. We want to make sure that every single time that you can watch every single episode, or play every single game, or watch every single movie, completely regardless of everything else. Now, I know there's exceptions to this, but that's my point. There were exceptions. It was the rule. Now, one of the things I've noticed is that nowadays, serialization, string continuity, is a lot more common. In fact, it's common to the point of being the norm now. A lot of people point to specific things as exactly where that got going, but I'm willing to go ahead and put my ignorant finger on history's mark and say it was Game of Thrones that really got this ball rolling. Well, there's obviously some stuff before that, going as far back as Babylon 5, actually. And obviously we have the soaps, which go back way back. And then we have Doctor Who, which goes even further back. Game of Thrones did something important. It pushed it up into popular consciousness. Something that happens a lot is there's the people who are the experts. They know. Then there's the people who are like one step up, who are probably hobbyists or geeks about a topic. Then they know next, right? So the experts know first, then the geeks know second, and then it goes up to people who are bothering to do research third, and then it gets up to popular consciousness, right? There's this layering of knowledge or ideas or concepts. And generally speaking, yeah, no kidding, Raximus. Generally speaking, oh, hi, Mr. Red. There's things don't shift or change until it hits the popular point, right? I can actually talk about this with regard to video games. Until Doom and Final Fantasy VII, and I can point to those two specific games came out, a lot of people didn't realize how big of an impact video games were already having, because those games broke out into popular consciousness. And people are like, oh, and lo and behold, we had the overwhelming boom of the late 90s and the early aughts with regards to video gaming. Star Trek as a franchise didn't really have that boom until Star Trek 4 came out. A Voyage Home, Star Trek certainly had its own niche and was doing its own thing and was doing well, but it didn't hit this popular layer until Star Trek 4, right? You get the idea. So that's why I say, and that's why I point very specifically to Game of Thrones. Well, we had string continuity and properly serialized shows before that. Game of Thrones pushed it all the way to the top layer, and everybody knew about Game of Thrones. And now people are willing to greenlight story ideas they weren't. Make sense? The reason I bring up all of that, by the way, Mr. Red, if you're still there, I want to tell you something because I think you'll find it funny. The reason I bring up all of that is one of the things I really praise this show so far, we're only 3 episodes in, but so far is that they're doing string continuity right. Because if there's something that recent television has taught me, is that it's really, really easy and possible to do string continuity wrong. Now, I shouldn't have to say that. It should be very obvious that you have to do something well. It has to be good, regardless of just being the thing. You know, there's such a thing as bad continuity, after all. We even have a negative category for that when it comes to reviews. But if you pay attention, even though these are 4 actually, episodes that are their own individual things, this really is one story, and it's framed, paced, tempoed, and arced out to fit one story, even if it's being chopped into 4 bites. Make sense? And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up with regards to this episode in particular, because episode 1 was almost entirely establishment. Even though there were some action bits, it was almost all about here's Rex, here's the characters, here's the premise, here's the plot. Episode 2 was then all about the build-up. We need to infiltrate. We need to show how much this is causing strain on Rex, how much Anakin is doing a thing. We have a little bit of world building in the background, but it's all the lead-up. So we have establishment, then we have the lead-up. Episode 3 is now the big moment. This is the intensity in the pacing, right? The tension is the highest. It's almost entirely an action episode, as they are now fighting to escape and survive and get out with Echo. Makes perfect sense, right? You get my point, though, right? This is good string continuity because... And then we'll see if episode 4 follows through. But at this point, I'm willing to say it probably will. Anyways, just wanted to get all of that out there. So, random question. They do this moment, and I immediately figured out what they were going for. Because there's this moment where, I believe it was Crosshair, has a heat sensor and is looking through the wall. And he sees a bunch of very vague blips, and then the overwhelming amount of heat that the Techno-Union people are generating. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They're organic with some cybernetic parts. But then I started thinking about it. How much heat is generated by whatever power source those droids have? Because it's obviously not a lot. And that got me thinking even more, even though this is almost assuredly just a quick shorthand for organics versus synthetics, I wonder if they really do down crank, like under provide the droids with power, right? I wonder if the droids really don't have that big of a battery or that big of a generator, so that might help to explain a lot, actually. Yeah, underclock, exactly. It feels like they're underclocked deliberately. It would make them cheaper. It would make them easier to mass produce. It would make it, you know, this would explain why why they don't have a great deal of power output, why they require an external gun to operate, why they're kind of stupid and can't adapt on the fly. Right? Like, it's just interesting to think about, because honestly, it makes a weirdly large amount of sense, doesn't it? As I've said before, the battle droids, especially the B1s most specifically, are very clearly the cheapos, right? The chaff, as I like to call it. And so it would make sense that they try to make them as absolutely cheap as they possibly can. Barely functional. Yeah, mass-produced junk, exactly. And that just got me thinking about that, because it's such a throwaway scene that lasts for like half a second. But it made me think, huh. Because, yeah, we do know they actually had to go out of their way in episode 2 to introduce the super battle droids, so they can have something that would actually have some kind of level of threat to the heroes. And if you're paying attention, in Clone Wars and in several other works, they kept introducing even better droids as they move forward to once again be able to actually present a threat to the heroes. Because, let's be honest, the B1s, they're junk. Anyways. So, the Decimator starts going, starts cutting its way through. They can I just say, I absolutely love how quickly and efficiently. They see that the decimator's cutting through, immediately back up to the second door, slam shut the second door, and immediately start sealing it as well. Did you catch that? That is such a great moment. It's so tiny. It's such a tiny little animation, but it shows just how competent and on top of things the Bad Batch really are. Just, whoop, nope, okay, back up. Yeah, no words, by the way. No orders, just, oh, okay. And the team, multiple people, immediately back up and start working on the second door. I love these little details like this. So Wrecker, we've already established that Wrecker is crazy strong. So him throwing a body up there, I could buy that. I could buy that. And they have the reflexes to be able to brace themselves up there. So, okay, sure. There's actually a moment I wrote down in my notes. I actually got about halfway through writing the note before I realized. Because I was like, wait, how's Wrecker going to get up there? Oh, yeah, they've got Anakin with them. Okay, cool. So Wat Tambor comes in. Arr, I'm so angry. They stole my property. I would love to make fun of this line, because it feels like such a cheap line, but I know too much about real-life corporate America to not know that there are actual individuals who actually think that way now. Like, that's not some horrible dystopian future thing. Now, that's not the norm. I hope it's not the norm. But that's already a thing. So, yeah, it's just, okay. And yeah, we have to understand what this is going to do to our bottom line. We must recoup our investments. We have to think about our profit margin. It's just like, whoa, dude. That's pretty on par for Wat Tambor, though, so that makes perfect sense. And yeah, I wasn't even going to history hazardous, because historically speaking, people have been, in several cases, less than property. That's a real thing. But so this is the first time we get a really, really good shot at Echo. And oh my god. Like, obviously, it was pretty obvious earlier, but it was a brief shot and a brief thing. And you just, oh my god, this poor man. This poor man. He's... It's kind of a cliche. He's straight up Darth Vadering, right? Like, more of his body, I said it earlier, more than 50% of his body is no longer his original body, has been replaced by something. And we get a little bit better shot of some of the hardware that's been clamped into him at every single part of him, up and along his spine. And just, oh my god. His skin is sallow. His ribs are showcasing. His lower half is gone. Oh, man. Yeah, and the head. Oh, poor Echo. And Brax actually pointed this out in chat earlier, but Echo remains cold the entire time. Did you catch that? There's even little bits of frost on his skin, even when they're in places where clearly it's warm enough that they wouldn't be freezing. We see this on the other clones. They actually go out of their way to show the faces of either Anakin or one of the other clones takes off their helmets, and we can see that they're not cold. But Echo is always cold. He's also almost always hunched over, kind of like this. There's just little details. And again, the episode treats us like we're smart. It processes that we're paying attention here, right? Because we are paying attention, and we notice this, and So then poor Wrecker, what's funny is this scene is played for laughs, but now Wrecker has to walk across the most stable possible footing to get to the other thing. I'm pretty sure I couldn't do that, like physically. I don't think I could do that. I don't know how Wrecker managed that. But then we see something. Yeah, I feel so bad for Wrecker there. Then we see something that actually amuses me, and it's... I know this sounds strange, but I continue to be surprised at how good this show is. I know that sounds like a strange sentence. But this whole time... I guess I shouldn't say this whole... It's only been like an episode and a half. This whole time, I've been wondering, why do these new Techno Union B1s... Like, they've got the B1 voice actor, and they've got the B1 voice modulation. So why do they sound like this? Like, why do they look like this? What's going on with them? Well, they can fly. And given the environment and the storms and the area and all the special stuff they've got specifically for this area, oh, okay. And that's actually a really great and surprisingly understated payoff, as they can just straight up fly. I was just waiting for them to make a "they fly now" joke. Thank God they didn't. I would have legitimately dinged the episode if they did. But they didn't make the joke. They didn't make the joke. Ahem. I did also I need to point out that Wrecker not only had a distraction in the droids to help keep him distracted, but he immediately and without hesitation jumped to grab Crosshair. Of course he did. So then Crosshair earns that nickname. Some of the shots he makes in this episode are actually bonkers. I can't even put into words. Or was it Hunter? Crosshair and Hunter look way too similar at a glance. They're the only ones I have trouble distinguishing when they got their helmets on. But Crosshair earns that nickname, going back to Crosshair, because his shots, absolutely crazy. Some of the shots he pulls off. And then Rex continues to be an amazing bro, because the village leader is obviously really pissed off, right? Right? Like what are you doing? Why are you bringing this war here? And Anakin, there's even this moment where Anakin actually says the word And I know that sounds strange, because if you know human speech, you know that the most commonly said word in the English language is the some vocalization that is I'm not actually joking. Is the other one. Right? It's something that we do in order to pause for a second, in order to process what we're saying. I just did it on accident. I just did it without even meaning to. It's there to allow your brain and your vocal cords to actually sync up with each other, because your brain is going a whole lot faster than your speaking ability is. And it sucks, and I hate it. And I've tried very hard to try and not do that over the years. But I bring this all up because in fiction, generally speaking, you don't say unless you mean it, because someone sat down and wrote that. And obviously they don't have to write when they're thinking about the next word. They know the next word's there. So if you're actually going to have an when it comes to a fiction, it means the character is trying to process and doesn't really know what they're doing, which is Anakin. Because Anakin is just it's Rex who steps forward and is a bro about this. And I love this little tidbit, because even before the translation comes through, he points to Echo and is talking about the Techno Union. And the villagers visibly recoil at what's been done to Echo, which makes sense. There's a subtle implication that these villagers are not actually like this is just a village, not like the central authority or whatever. And these people probably are specifically living out here in this village because they're trying to get away from all this crap, right? So, yeah, exactly. They don't even need tech to process or to translate and process what's going on, because they see that and they see what's been done to that man. And it's like, oh. And there's definitely some tech aversion in how they live their lives. So, yeah. Then tech translates and they're like, we got your back. It's a great moment. And then we see the return of Darth Granitus. I can't believe they brought the boulder back. It's not going to happen, but if the boulder shows up again, I swear to God, that becomes a meme. Darth Boulder. So we have to have our big battle scene. Almost every arc of the Clone Wars has at least one big battle scene. And that's of course they do. It's called the Clone Wars, for God's sakes. It's called Star Wars. And it's also, again, very, very iconic, very significant part of the iconography of what Star Wars is. You need to have the big battle scene. But if I might be so bold, while there's not a lot to specifically analyze or talk about here, there is one thing. Because I think this battle scene at this village is in many ways better than what most of the Star Wars movies managed in terms of big battle scenes. At least amongst the prequel trilogy. Now you're probably thinking, okay, you're gonna have to explain that, Laura. Sure thing. No, had to get off the suicide. Very important. There's two general approaches that a lot of films, including Star Wars films, like to use when it comes to the big battle scene. One is stasis and the other's Yu-Gi-Oh! Stasis is obvious. Shoot, 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 shoot. Nothing's happening. Nothing's changing, nothing's moving. The battle lines aren't adjusting. Nobody's changing their tactics. Nobody's falling back to this or that. It's just a battle is happening, right? That's it. It's in stasis. It's there to have something cool to look at while we wait for the next plot beat to show up. This can still be done well on a gameplay axis, but it almost always kind of sucks on a narrative axis because, again, the battle is just happening and nothing's really going or moving. Second approach they tend to use is Yu-Gi-Oh! All right. Oh, we're completely curb stomping the enemy. We're winning. Oh, God. And then the enemy comes back with this thing, and now they're winning. But then you come back with your own thing, and then you're winning. And again, this isn't necessarily bad. I can actually name a very good battle that does exactly this, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields in Return of the King. But you can see how, I bet right now, right in your head, you can think of a dozen movies or shows or games that has one of these two approaches to battle, where either there's just battle happening or professional analysis here. The thing I like about this battle is it's a battle. Both sides are both giving and taking throughout the course of it, because of course they are. The villagers are villagers, for God's sakes, who don't really have advanced technology. These aren't Ewoks, who are somehow magically super teddy bears. It's the gummy bear juice. And we see that the Bad Batch are certainly giving quite a bit, but they're having to give ground quite a bit as well. Because there's only like 5 of them, or 6 of them, or however many there are. And that is an entire company that's coming after them with tank support. I know they're walkers instead of tanks, but let's be honest, those are tanks. Fighting a tank on foot, you get the overall idea. This is a really well-constructed, well-designed battle. The blocking, the choreography, the mapping out of exactly how this battle is going is surprisingly smart. And it kept me engaged the entire time because you could tell that it's not just going to be, Oh, yeah, by the way, I have spoken in several episodes now about how strong Wrecker is. Oh my God. Walker comes down with its leg right onto him, and he manages to hold it. And the camera bothers to pan down so you could see the ground start to crack. Now, that's insane. But what I like about it is it doesn't overstate it. In fact, this battle also does this with Anakin. Before I continue talking about Wrecker, I want to talk about Anakin for just a second. For years, I have said that Anakin is one of the heaviest of the heavies when it comes to Star Wars. I know this is a matter of big debate, and it's just opinion and blah, 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 blah. But Anakin, pretty freaking high tier, right? As a Force user, he's one of the biggies, one of the heavies. But I've also said for years, and I've enjoyed this idea since the 90s, actually, that the Force is lower tier than a lot of other settings, right? You see magic in Forgotten Realms, or you see, I don't know, the Q of Star Trek, or you see what Warcraft can accomplish, or Final Fantasy XIV, or whatever. The Force is just lower tier in terms of what can accomplish than most of those things. And I honestly think that's a good thing. I think it helps ground the setting. Sure, they're mystical monks, but they're not, gods walking, right? I know there's exceptions to that before you jump down my throat. So this whole thing, I'm like, yeah, no, this is great. And I like how they use Anakin here. Because in some specific fictional works, one particular Force user could just walk in and win the battle by themselves. But instead, Anakin goes after one of the tanks by himself, one of the heavy armors. Now, he does win, but it takes him a bit, it costs him a bit, and he doesn't just run over it. He doesn't run roughshod over it. Instead, it's actually a battle. And that actually does a good job of emphasizing how strong Anakin is. By bringing it further down into lower tier, I'm actually more invested in Anakin being a total badass. I'm actually more impressed by the feats he accomplishes because they're believable. Rather than him just running over everything, I know I've said that like 3 times now, I apologize. Rather than him just crushing everything, or whatever, it takes him some effort, but he manages it. And so one guy taking on a heavy armor is believable. And this ties into what Wrecker was doing too. Wrecker probably couldn't have actually taken out that entire walker by himself. Of course he couldn't. But he was able to hold it for a bit, seconds actually. And like Hazardous says, that's probably the actual max weight limit he can manage. He was able to hold it just for a bit while Anakin was finishing his thing. And then Anakin gives the big force push in order to help knock the one tank into the other one, relieving the pressure off of Wrecker. Which makes it even more believable, because all he had to do was hold the line for long enough for their heavy to do his job. That's awesome. So that's a well-designed battle, and well-designed usage of its characters and its heavies within the battle. Huge praise on both fronts. The other tidbit of praise I want to give this episode is that the pacing is just amazing. I didn't notice the time passing as I was furiously typing notes this entire time until the episode was actually over and it started doing the credits, because it was just racing through in a good way, right? In a you don't notice the time passing kind of a way. And yeah, also, actually, further to emphasize here, sorry, I forgot to actually mention this. The entire Bad Batch team, who are emphasized to be pretty high tier and very capable, and are able of doing things, above and beyond even the normal clone troopers, are able to take down one tank, while Anakin takes down the other tank. And again, believable. I'm with that. Very, very well thought out. And then Echo's like, yeah, everything's going to be just like old times. And I can't be the only one whose first reaction to that was, oh god, what's going to happen next? And that's pretty much the mentality I've had this entire arc is, oh god, now what? Now what? What's hitting next? How do we rate this one? It's a lot more character dry. This is almost entirely an action flick, an action episode. But it is a culmination action episode. It's very well written, very well choreographed, very well thought out, very well presented. Normally, these kind of action-y episodes tend to be a little bit lower tier in terms of review. But I think it is sufficiently well constructed that I think that raises it above what a normal action-y episode would be. Now, I know that still makes it orange, but again, that still makes it solid, right? Like, that's still a really good episode, as I've already emphasized. Yeah, the action itself is well characterized. That's a good way to put that, Rex. So, I think I'm going to agree with the crowd here. I think we have another solid orange entry. It would be very easy for this to dip down into yellow. Yeah, now, we actually talked about this when we were going through Arcane. Something that some people consider as unfair, and that's, a valid opinion, is that if you have a trilogy or a quadrilogy or a duology or whatever, the finale, if it's done well, will score better than the others. But I don't think that's unfair. I think it's just life, right? Like, to use the example I used when we were talking about Arcane yesterday, Return of the King simply wouldn't be Return of the King if not for the first two films, right? You need that build-up in order to have the payoff. We've actually covered several games which try to have payoff without build-up. And I almost always give that a negative, because payoff without build-up is just, huh? But yeah, no, exactly. Arguably, the payoff episode, the payoff movie, the payoff game should score better. And I'm trying really hard not to talk about it, but a certain effect of mass that follows into this exact same mentality. Something that should have been absolutely nailing it, and totally didn't. Because that's the other side of this. The final reason I think it is fair to functionally be judging the finale harsher and giving it more possibilities for it to actually be scoring better is because it's also much easier for it to score worse. If they don't successfully stick that landing... Anyways. Given our time frame here, for those of you curious, I think what's going to happen, we're going to go and cover episode 4, and then I think I'm going to go and take my lunch break. And then I think we have enough time to go ahead and start the next quad arc. I think we're pushing through these quickly enough in order to accomplish that. So I think that's going to be our rough schedule here. I'm playing this very much by ear, depending, because I don't have a schedule, right? I don't have a deadline. I just sit here and I talk until I run out of things to talk about. I'm not going to talk about Echo's Eyes, because that's alliteration, and we all know alliteration is a sin. How dare you, Hazardous. Anyways, see you in a little bit.